and our first and hopefully last entirely virtual one. My name is Antonia Marinova. I am Assistant Director of Education to Career at the Boston Foundation. I will be sharing host and MC duties over the next 3 days with my colleague Juan Cantu, who probably doesn't need introduction with this crowd, but Juan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Juan Cantu. I'm Program Officer with Boston Foundation and former Success Boston coach with Heights Career Task Force, and happy to see you all here. Thank you for joining.
Awesome. Just seeing your faces here on Zoom, or at least those of you who have your cameras on, we're just delighted to see so many of you this morning. Coaches, longtime partners, friends, allies to Success Boston, new friends. I think that's a true strength of our initiative, is this very strong collective partnership approach. Because none of our institutions could do this work alone, but together we can do a lot, and we have done a lot. So thank you for joining us today. I would also like to extend a special welcome to some new guests we have from Greenfield Community College, from Bridgewater State University, as well as our Success Boston partners, UMass Boston and Bunker Hill. These 4 institutions, along with 2 others, are participating in some exciting new work with the state and the Lumina Foundation that's focused on equitable outcomes for all students across the state. So welcome. Because we are fortunate enough to have so many of you join us here today, we're going to ask you to introduce yourself in the chat function with your name and organization. And while you do that, I will use the opportunity to walk you through what we have in store for you for the next 3 days. And just by way of Zoom housekeeping, a couple of things. FYI, we will be recording these sessions to make them available to those who couldn't join us, or to you as well as a resource later on. If you don't mind, when you're not speaking, mute yourself so we can avoid some sort of background noise. Whenever you have questions that pop up, feel free to use the Q&A function. We hope this is as interactive as we can make it, considering that it's not in person. And finally, if you don't mind turning your camera on so that we can simulate this sort of being together in person. Of course, we fully understand that there may be some sensitivities, so that's up to you. But if you don't mind, we would love to see you. Now, the Success Boston Institute, as many of you probably already know, is an annual event that kicks off the new year for coaches, both veteran and new, for other nonprofit staff, for our higher ed partners, for our whole Success Boston Village, basically. We have codified its format and its curriculum over the past few years, actually as part of our work as a talent hub community, again, with support from the Lumina Foundation. The Institute introduces new participants, reinforces for previous ones the goals, the activities, the results of this work. It refreshes our collective spirit and commitment. It provides valuable opportunities to hear from our higher education partners in Success Boston, to receive in-depth training on a number of relevant topics each year. And perhaps most importantly, it's an opportunity for you all to get to know each other or to reconnect with each other, to share thoughts, ideas, advice in what is a community of learning and practice that thereafter meets at least once a month during the academic year. Now, as some of you have attended in the past, you know that this is typically a day-long in-person event. And we have spared you the need to sit on Zoom for 8 hours this year and divided it into a couple of hour-long sessions over the span of 3 days. Although just a note that today we will go a little bit later until 12:30. As in past years, we will begin today with an overview of Success Boston to ground us in its history, its current efforts, its effectiveness, what we have learned. Our colleague, Elizabeth Pauley, who is an Associate Vice President at the Foundation, will lead us through this section from her rather unique vantage point of having been there at the beginning when the initiative got its start now over a decade ago. Following her presentation, we will spend the next couple of hours in an in-depth training on providing culturally responsive, trauma-informed student supports, particularly to students who are young men of color, which you could say are competencies that are important at any time, but maybe particularly more so in the incoming year, given sort of the dual backdrops of the pandemic and the racial justice movement. Our friends from Mass Mentoring Partnership, Janine Smith, Miguel Torres, and Beth Raster will lead us through that session, and that will be today. Tomorrow, on day 2, our focus will be on higher education. We will begin with some training from Dr. Lori Paul from Boston University on best practices, strategies, tools for student learning and engagement in a virtual world. Since most instruction next semester, maybe next year, is likely to be delivered either entirely remotely or maybe through some sort of a hybrid fashion. We will build in a lot of opportunities for Q&A during that portion, and after her session, we will delve into a conversation with representatives from key higher education institutions in Success Boston, UMass Boston, Bunker Hill, Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology, Roxbury Community College, Boston University, and our higher ed partners from those institutions will share more about their sort of institution-specific plans for the fall, important things, processes, resources to use to support students on their campuses more effectively, any upcoming campus orientations or events you should know about and attend as coaches. And of course, we're going to have opportunity for interacting during that session as well. Now, finally, on Thursday, which will be the last day of the Institute, our session will be specifically tailored to coaches, advisors, other professionals who work with students directly. That day will start with an overview of what we have found to be the typical frequency, intensity, focus of coaching over the span of an academic year. We will also share some common monthly messaging that we are beginning to put together as a resource / toolkit for you about what types of supports that you as coaches would focus on and prioritize at different times of the year. We will include training by veteran coaches on sort of best ways to help students resolve some challenges that they encounter frequently. We have built-in opportunities for interactive conversation, hands-on activities in small groups so that you can actually get to know each other and share learning. And finally, we have also allowed more time that day for further conversations with our higher ed partners so that we can continue any conversation that we may have started on day 2 and just didn't have the time to finish. Now with that, thank you again for joining us this morning, and I would like to pass the proverbial podium to my colleague Elizabeth Polly to give us an overview of Success Boston. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Antonia, and good morning, everyone. I am thrilled to be able to join you, sort of, today. As Antonia said, I have been there from the beginning for Success Boston, so I'm just thrilled beyond thrilled that we're doing our 4th annual Coaching Institute. I think it's a great opportunity for coaches and our community to come together and re-energize and share what we're learning. There are a few of us on the Zoom this morning who have been there at the beginning, and so I'll count on them to check me if I forget something or tell this story in ways that might take creative license. One of them is Joelle Mora, who has been coaching, I'm pretty sure, since we had our very first student, but we've got other longtime partners who've just really been committed to this work. So I can't see you because I'm screen sharing. So if you have a comment or a question, I urge you to put it in the chat. And Antonia and Juan, if you can keep an eye on the chat, we can catch those. And once I stop screen sharing, I'm happy to see you and we can talk about whatever you like. So for those of you who may not remember, one morning in November 2008, this was the front page of the Boston Globe. And it was shocking. It was shocking in a city that prides itself on education to know that even while we had spent 25 years increasing the high school completion rate and we had been very pleased at our joint and mutual citywide efforts to increase high school graduation rate, we were only graduating about a third of the students who made it all the way through high school, graduated, enrolled in college, and then went on 7 years later to earn a post-secondary credential. So 1/3 of those students were earning their credential by the time they were 25. Now, I should pause here to note that Neil Sullivan from the PIC and Joe McLaughlin, who was then at Northeastern University, now of the PIC, deserve a ton of credit for being the first people to even think to ask the question, what happens to BPS kids after they graduate from high school? We were among the first cities in the country to even think of asking this question, and what we found was really distressing. So it's 1/3, roughly, of those who enroll in college completed a post-secondary credential. It was about 1/4 or less of the seniors, and it was 15% or less of the freshmen. So really shocking news. Mayor Menino, also deserves a ton of credit for his response. His response was not to put the blame on any one component of our education system, but rather to charge all of us, all of the stakeholders in the city, to do better for Boston's kids, or as he thought of them, his kids. So he charged the Boston Public Schools, the Boston Foundation, the Boston Private Industry Council on behalf of the employer community, UMass Boston, Bunker Hill, and the higher ed community to come up with an answer. What were we going to do to increase success rates for students in Boston? So we set these goals that we would have a 50% increase in the college graduation rate for enrollees of the high school class of 2009. So those were the seniors at the time, and we were going to go from a 35% completion rate to a 52% completion rate. But the real work was going to be to double the college graduation rate, beginning with the high school class of 2011. So 70%, that became our goal. 70% of those who enroll will complete within 6 years of high school graduation. Together, we committed to a framework that had 4 parts. So first, the BPS agreed to lead the getting ready work. So get students more prepared academically and non-academically to succeed in their post-secondary pursuits. The way they focused on that initially was to remove academic barriers, increase the rigor of high school. They invested heavily in expanding advanced placement courses and support for the PSAT. They also partnered with Boston After School to build the non-academic skills through summer programming, through badging, and have continued this work across several different superintendent changes. And many of you know our good friend, Marcia Innes Mitchell, who has been stewarding this at the Boston Public Schools for a long time. That's getting ready. So getting in, the Boston Foundation committed to supporting coaching. We saw that as students moved from high school to college, there was a big gap, and students were falling through that gap. So they weren't having help to transition. We lost a lot over the summer, through summer melt. Students who intended to go to college never made it there. But once they were there, we saw something equally disturbing, if not more so, which was at the first bump in the road, students decided college wasn't for them and that they weren't college material. So we, as the Boston Foundation, agreed to support nonprofit organizations that you all represent to help students make that transition, to help them understand, of course they can do it. Of course they can navigate this new world that is college, and that there's always a solution. So the coaches have been doing that work for over 10 years, and you'll see later in the deck, for over 6,000 students from the Boston Public Schools who have received this helping hand, this shoulder to lean on, and this voice and partner in the work. That's getting in. Getting through was the charge for the higher ed community, and this was led by UMass Boston and Bunker Hill on behalf of the 37 institutions that raised their hand with no additional resources and said, yes, we want to be good neighbors. We're mission-driven institutions. We want to create success for more students on our campuses. So they agreed to track student persistence, student progress, to take a special interest and look at the students from Boston on their campuses and make sure they were connecting to as-needed services. So they agreed to lead campus-based efforts. Many of you already know this because you attend monthly coaches meetings that the colleges run. UMass, Bunker Hill, RCC, Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology, and others all meet regularly with nonprofit partners to ensure that we are working together to meet students' needs as they arise. So that's getting through. And getting connected was the reason we're doing this is so that students can stay in our region and thrive in the careers of their choice. So led by the Private Industry Council on behalf of the employer community, we agreed to do whatever we could to increase connections to the workforce through internships, through summer jobs, through career exploration. We know that students who have a career goal in mind are much more likely to be successful in college. And so this remains an important priority for our initiative, even 10 years later. So getting ready, getting in, getting through, and getting connected. So the rest of the slides are going to dig deep into coaching, but I do need to underscore that Success Boston is so much more than coaching. It is, and it will always depend on this cross-sector partnership of the Boston Public Schools, the higher ed institutions, the PIC, and the employer community. And so while these slides are really going to do a deep dive on coaching, we know that it is but one, very important, but one part of Success Boston. But because this is the Coaches Institute, we want to make sure to reflect back what we see in the work that you're doing. So when we started Success Boston, we agreed, or we provided support for 300 students a year from the Boston Public Schools. And over the years, that has grown to almost 1,000 every year. I think this year we're a little north of 600 students a year who get the coaching. And who are they? Well, you can see here some of the demographics, and I apologize that I think my camera is blocking. There we go. You can see on the right-hand column, where do coach students attend college? The largest 55% are four-year colleges, the middle 41% are two-year colleges, and the 4% are not enrolled. So that is of those coach students, that group of 600 or so students per year who receive transition coaching from all of you and from others. It's worth noting that 80% of BPS graduates attend 25 colleges. And when you go a level deeper, it's actually a third of those students go to Bunker Hill and UMass Boston. So their leadership and partnership in the work is critical, because that's where most of the graduates of the Boston Public Schools are going to. Those are the two institutions. Who participates in coaching? You can see that the demographics of students who are coached resemble very closely the demographics of the Boston Public Schools, although we coach a larger percentage of Black students than are represented in the overall student body. I don't have it on this slide, but I will note that we tend to have between like a 60-40 split of women to men. So we do coach more women than young men. And many of you who are doing the coaching know that in the last few years, we've set clear goals around reaching young men and making sure that young men of color in particular are receiving the supports that they need. Whoops, sorry. Woo! Oh boy, here's where it falls apart. Okay, so what is the coaching? So the coaching, as I mentioned before, starts generally in the senior year of high school. We don't believe that college readiness starts in the senior year of high school, but at that point, we have worked to connect coaches who will stay with the students for 2 years, and Joelle will tell you often more than that, after high school graduation, to really focus students on their post-secondary plans. So building a plan, checking in on that plan, and marking progress against it. We have commissioned Apt Associates, which many of you are familiar with, to do an evaluation of coaching. And what they found is this is what coaches tend to be talking about with students. Far and away, the thing that the coach is most often talking to students about is academics. Now, as you know, coaches are not tutoring students. Coaches are not academic advisors. Coaches are not tutors. But the things that students are bringing up with coaches and the things that coaches are checking in with students on relate to classes, which I think, of course, makes sense. There are other things that students talk about with their coaches, including life as the second largest. So that could be a housing issue, could be food, it could be a misplaced TPAS. Financial aid is a major topic that students discuss with their coaches. And in fact, we know that students would like more support talking about financial aid with their coaches. So these are the kinds of things that coaches tend to cover in their twice monthly interactions with students. And I had to delete the vertical label, but this is the percentage of coaching interactions. So another lesson that we've learned along the way from Abt Associates is that the frequency of coaching really makes a difference. In fact, the frequency of those interactions between students and coach is more important than the length of time of those interactions. Now, there's one exception about that, and that is the length of time does really seem to matter when it comes to financial aid or FAFSA renewal, but the major impact seems to be how often are you checking in with your students? And that's why we ask you at a minimum to be interacting with your students at least twice a month, because having that person that they know is there to connect to really does seem to make a difference to students. So this slide attempts to capture a lot of what I've just referenced and a lot of what we've done. In the 10 years or 11 now that we've worked on this, there have been major financial investments, some from the Boston Foundation. We received a large federal grant in 2014 that we had to match, some from the Boston Public Schools, the higher ed institutions, and the nonprofits themselves. So it's over $20 million that has been invested in this work. We coordinate the work, so our regular cross-sector meetings of the Boston Public Schools, the PIC, the higher ed institutions, and the Boston Foundation, we meet regularly, and the Boston Foundation coordinates those in partnership with the Opportunity Agenda. It's important to note, and you'll see in the top right-hand column or corner, the Talent Hub designation. We were designated by the Lumina Foundation as a Talent Hub, which are communities across the country that are coming together in a collectively aligned way to increase the post-secondary completion rate for their communities. And we can talk more about that. But it's important to note that this validation was amazing to receive and opened up a broad community of other cities and municipalities and regions that are doing similar work to what we are doing. So it was really important. And it supported the creation of a pathway at Bunker Hill and UMass to ease transfer and to accelerate time to a credential. Other major accomplishments that many of you are familiar with include the Mayor's Tuition-Free Community College Program. This is not insignificant that our mayor's office has stepped up to say that cost is not going to be the barrier for students to succeed in our city. So what have the results been? There's a lot on this slide, but I direct you to the right-hand column. If you remember, I started with about a third of the students who enrolled in college were completing. Today, it's 54% of students who are completing. That is the result of a cross-sector partnership, and coaches are a major part of that. So to all of you who have been doing this, I say thank you. There's been a 77% increase in the number of high school graduates from the Boston Public Schools. We also see that students are far more likely to persist into year 2 and year 3, and they're also much more likely in a statistically significant way to complete their FAFSA, which of course for many is a barrier. And we have our friends at UAspire who provide trainings and who've been key partners in this work from the very beginning to thank for that. So this represents, oh, I really did put my pictures in the wrong place. This represents what I was just referencing around the growth of graduates. And I think our city can take a great deal of pride in this particular chart. So the bar charts, the vertical bars are the numbers. So when I say we had a 35% completion rate, that was 735. That was the actual number of graduates. For the last class for whom we have data, the high school class of 2012, there were 1,347 graduates from a post-secondary program. That means we grew from 24.7% of the seniors to 38% of the seniors. Clearly, there's still more to do, but that is significant growth over the course of a decade. What that means, if we look at average earnings, is hundreds of millions of dollars over a lifetime earned. A difference in hundreds of millions of dollars in average lifetime earnings. And you all, our coaches, have been key drivers of this growth. You haven't done it alone, but you are a critical component in this work. So thank you for that. Now, there is more to do for sure. We still see achievement gaps in graduation rates. We still see Latino young men and Black young men having the lowest graduation rates of students who are coached, and actually of BPS graduates. So that is why we've asked you to aim for having 40% of young men of color in your cohort, because we still have more work to do. We have more work to do to make sure students are included and feel as though they belong on the post-secondary campuses that they attend. And as a city, I think we're committed to making sure we do better and build better systems for our young people. Just have a couple more slides before I turn it open the floor for questions and comments, and then turn it back to Antonia and Juan. But I included this slide. This measures persistence and FAFSA renewal, because this is actually, while the slide previous was the growth in graduation rates, which reflects all of our efforts as a citywide initiative, this is really about coaching and what the effect of coaching has been on students who have received it. So again, this is from the Abt Associates evaluation of coaching. And you can see, if you look at the top horizontal bar where it says persistence into the second year of college, that students are 11% more likely to persist into year 2 if they have a coach. This is statistically significant in terms of an impact size. So we know that coaching is helping more students stick with it, and they will never finish if they don't stick with it. We see in the third year, students are 21% more likely to persist into year 3, and students are 9% more likely to renew their FAFSA. Now, this is for the high school class, I think, of 2015 and 16. And the next slide shows a slightly smaller effect size, but still significantly significant, sorry. We see a 5% impact on a student's ability to persist into year 2, and a similar effect for year 3, and that they're 8% more likely to complete their FAFSA. I've thrown a lot of numbers at you, but I think the most important thing to keep at the top of your mind is that coaching is helping students enroll, stay enroll, and complete their FAFSA. And that is the important work that you are doing, and for that I thank you. That's what I have in terms of the background of Success Boston. I do think we've got a couple of minutes if there were questions or comments, and I'm going to stop sharing. Actually, no, I'm not going to stop sharing, just in case I need to go back to a slide. Antonia, were there questions in the chat? Or
yes, so the first question that we received in the chat is from Lisa Patrick, and she wondered about the extent to which the coaching model involves not just the students, but their families.
Great question. So from the beginning, we've received urging from lots of different people to include families as part of the coaching. And part of our strategy has been to work with nonprofits that are community connected and know their students and families well. We have not built in an explicit family strategy, but we know that students are part of a family unit. And so making sure that the student has the support that they need often involves the family. I think we probably have more to do as an initiative, but my bet is if you talk to coaches, they're routinely working with students and helping them figure out how they, within their family, can be successful in post-secondary.
In response to another question we got from Jackie, we will share the slides from today, as well as from all the other presentations from the rest of the Institute. We don't have any more questions in the chat, but would anyone like to just unmute themselves and ask a question?
Or share some reflections from doing the work.
Hi, this is Portia Franklin from Weston House. So I just wanted to comment on the question around families, because Weston-House Boys and Girls Club, we work a lot with families. A lot of our members, we've known them since they were little, so we've had to in some way engage the families. I think we also really do a great job at Weston-House and as an initiative with engaging supporters. So we will find an aunt or a cousin or an older sibling or a guidance counselor, or someone who knows the student well, who can also serve as an accountability partner where we're can't get in touch with the student or when there is an issue or a problem. So I would say we do engage families, friends, supporters, all the above to make sure that we're supporting the student.
And thank you, Portia. The only thing I would add is that when Portia introduced herself, I think she neglected to mention that she is a former Coach of the Year.
Yes.
Thank you for mentioning that.
While the rest of you think about maybe asking that question that's been on your mind, just wanted to note that in the chat, Kate O'Brien from Bunker Hill has very graciously offered to share Bunker Hill specific data on coaching. If you are interested, just shoot her an email, and the email address is in the chat.
Kate, thank you, because we know that is a large percentage of both our coach students and the BPS students overall. So that's very helpful. I'm going to stop screen sharing, Antonia, just so I can see more folks. But this is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. If you have a question or observation now, please feel free to share it. But we've got a lot of time together, which is such a gift we don't always have. So
wonderful.
So thank you.
Thank you. Juan?
All right.